Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Dr. Hans Koenigsmann. Hans is a German-American aerospace engineer whose career has been dedicated to advancing reusable spacecraft and launch vehicles. He joined the SpaceX team as the fourth technical member in 2002. Through his 19-year career at SpaceX, Hans and his team have supported more than 100 launches. He's one of the world's most renowned rocket scientists and is actively engaged in the aerospace and space exploration community, serving in advisory and board roles across multiple companies, including Stoke Aerospace and VAST. Recently, Hans flew on board Blue Origin on the sub-orbital flights. Dr. Koenigsmann, welcome to the Future Space.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for having me.
Hans, let's start with three words that for you capture the essence of space.
I think what surprised me really is how black it is. It's just, sky goes from blue to black really quickly. And so black is definitely something that captures space for me. The second thing, it's quiet. It's part of the vacuum, obviously, but I feel like black and quiet encompasses, I guess, the 2/3. And then the last one I struggled with, it's like vast, I think is the right term, maybe. It's like you see, the Earth is pretty large too, right? But then you see beyond that, it's so much bigger when you step out and go back. And the moment you see the Earth, everything becomes really, really big in the universe. It's just like, so it's, what did I say? Black, quiet, and vast.
I assume that those three words were different before you went up?
Probably. I would not have said black, actually. Would have probably said something different, more technical and more along the line of how I imagined it. But it does, the darkness, or like the absence of light in a certain direction is pretty amazing. And then obviously the other side is completely bright because that's where the sun is, right? So it's like very, very sharp, either very bright or very dark.
So there's a physicality to the experience that you did not expect at all.
Yeah, it's brief, but you are outside the atmosphere, you are in space, and you get to see it, and it's just pretty amazing. It's a very, very unique perspective.
You're a space engineer, background in engineer. Which one came first, space or the engineer?
No, I think actually I wanted to be a pilot. I still am a pilot to some extent. And then I started studying on airplanes, and then I moved over to space. And on space, what fascinated me, or on space technology and satellites, what fascinated me was guidance, navigation, and control. And to some extent, actually, that is kind of the pilot on the whole thing. So it's kind of, at least as a theme, right? But it took me a while to actually see that. So yeah, I think I'm fascinated by the motion of objects and controlling that and pointing the right way and getting everything in the right spot.
If we're living in an era where the technology for rockets did not exist, you most likely would have worked with airplanes. I did see recently the engineering of these engines on planes, the big ones. It's absolutely insane. We take it for granted because we fly, but we don't understand the conditions in which those things are operating day in, day out.
It's amazing how reliable they are and how good they have become over the last, 20 years, 30 years maybe.
As an engineering who has worked for 20 years in space with SpaceX, do you feel that we've kind of almost plateaued the technology of rocket engineering and there needs to be some kind of revolution for the next phase?
So we plateaued before that. And then SpaceX actually did something that moved the whole thing a good deal forward. So before that, there was proven technology on the engines and everything, but it was all expendable rockets, with the exception of the shuttle that needed a lot of work to be reused and then only partially too, right? And then SpaceX basically introduced the all-day reusable rocket that basically reuses, I want to say 3/4, the booster, which is the biggest part of the rocket, and then the fairing, which encapsulates the payload. And so the second stage, or the upper stage, is the only thing that's not being reused, but it's relatively small, and it's also really, really hard to do that. Anyways, that basically brought the cost down on space travel dramatically. And for a long time, we were also trying to improve technology where we actually should have improved cost. Cost was really the thing that kept space so elusive and limited to national agencies, to expensive satellites. Bringing the cost down allows commercial operation, allows commercial projects, and opens the door to a lot of applications that we haven't had before. Among them, also space tourism to some extent.
When people look at space, obviously they see it as a destination. And whenever we talk about space, we talk about the technology of space, we talk about satellites, we talk about the science, the cosmos. But going a little bit about philosophy, what do you think is the human story of space?
There's a lot of things that we didn't understand about space in the last couple hundred years, right? And we know so much more today, and it puts us in a place where we think we understand more how the universe works and how, I mean, it goes beyond our perspective. Our horizon was so many hundreds, thousands of years limited to what we see, but our actual horizons. Now we can go up, not just 100 kilometers, but maybe 1,000 even, yeah. And then your horizon suddenly is the universe. And that opens your horizon also in an intellectual way, that makes you wonder, why is life here? Is there other life? Is this a unique situation that we have on planet Earth? Or does it happen in many, many other planets? And how does this all work together, right? It's a little bit like mind-opening and at the same time super humbling, because we realize there's no way our current technology gets us beyond, I don't know, maybe beyond Saturn. Or, I mean, obviously on satellites you have 50 years and you can fly 50 years, but human travel is really limited. We struggle to get to the moon, and we struggle even more to get to Mars, hopefully soon. But then beyond that, it gets really, really difficult with what we have right now on propulsion. So you're right in what you said earlier. We should actually advance another step, although we just took a fairly big step, but we should go another step and probably more steps to get to the level of technology that allows us to roam around, at least in our planetary system.
You think we've become we take progress a little bit for granted because our awareness of the world, we were, at the moon barely 50 years ago, and we complain that it's taken so long. And if we look back into history, progress and big leaps always happens in hundreds of years, thousands of years. The wheel was invented thousands of years, and it took thousands of years more for one big step after that. It's not linear, right?
Exactly. It's not linear. It comes in clumps, and there's piles of innovation, and then nothing happens for a while, and then here's the other. And then sometimes one innovation triggers the other, yeah? And so it looks like multiple innovations, but it's really just one thing that triggered that. So, I mean, we did go to the moon. It was really, really tedious the last time we did it, because the costs were pretty high. And then we started working on the cost, and for a long time, we chipped away on lowering the costs. And now suddenly we go back to the moon, and hopefully it's now commercial and economically viable to actually stay there, which was in the 70s was just not possible. It was just too much. I hope I'm saying this the right way, but this might also then trigger another round of innovations that allows us eventually to go to Mars and then become something like somewhat multi-planetary. I mean, I see that definitely takes a couple more decades to become really true. But I also feel like it does accelerate sometimes when you have these innovation jumps every once in a while. One thing that is totally non-space related, but it's actually ship related. If you think about it, sailing was the same for like thousands of years, yeah? And then suddenly here's foiling. And you combine the foil on the sail and the foil underwater, and the thing is suddenly triples the velocity, or maybe even more. And I think that is absolutely fascinating. It's a technology that has been around for so many, many years, and suddenly we are able to make such a big jump. It just fascinates me.
I'm listening to this book, the book of yesterday. It talks a lot about the history of narratives and innovations, and we always think that innovations happen in a vacuum. One person invents things, and the reality is that person did not invent. The power of that person is actually to combine or to see all these different tools from a different perspective. Whether it's Darwin, whether it's Edison, they did not invent those technologies. They saw these technologies from a different angle and where the application was different.
I always say it's the right question is more important than the right answer. And that kind of plays in a two-way question. You could say, could I combine these two foils and make it actually one for water and one for wind? Would have been the right question where you go, oh, I think I can do that. But the answer comes out of that, but the question is actually the thing that really has the thought process involved.
Right now, we're in a time where I think the narrative about our species has become so doom and gloom. We think we've destroyed everything, and now we're thinking of going to space, and we're going to mess up a universe that maybe doesn't want to be disrupted. I personally think that the universe is waiting to be disrupted. What would be the point of nothingness out there? Do you think that humans have a place in space beyond the planet?
I think so. I mean, there's truly nothing we would displace in that sense. There's no other population, so it would actually be something true exploration and not just a land grabbing feast that we had so many times in our past, right? So yeah, I do think, I'm not sure what Mars is for when not for that. There's definitely other planets that are really hostile in an environmental way, and so is Mars to some extent too, right? It's clearly not the welcoming place per se. We need to do things there. But, maybe we are adaptable enough to actually survive there, and maybe we can adapt to the climate and get by that with our little atmosphere around us and bottles or in our spacesuit, so we can actually live there. And if not, then at least we learn something about planetary geology and how planets develop and what might happen, in the future to this planet.
My experience with these big objectives, or even if you look at history, they're needed because you need that carrot, you need that dream, that vision. But in reality, what happens is you discover something along the way that becomes more important. Like you can even look from Europe to North America, the discovery of North America. North America was not the intended destination. It was Asia and the spice and all these other places they had heard about. Turns out that, there's this giant thing in the middle that's worth a lot more. And I think that by the time we are capable of settling on Mars, we will have discovered other things, or the technology that we will have will almost kind of become irrelevant to Mars itself as that vision that we have, but we will be on the way for something even more.
Yeah, we don't know what we find, and but the odds are is that we find something we don't expect. But then, how do you express this now? You can't say, "Oh, we're going to go there and then we see what we find." We need a really more rational way of going there and write it down. And so there's a lot of science associated with that. In the end, might not be as relevant as the rest of that what we find. I always say that I work a little bit on asteroid mining with a company called FoS too, right? And I always say if the asteroids would be made out of gold, this would not even be a debate. We would definitely mine every asteroid that we could possibly get to, yeah? But that's not the case. So obviously we have to argue in different ways to actually go do mining there in the future. But yeah, I mean, humans want something that they can understand and justifies basically the effort. And it's just sometimes hard to describe that.
It's such a concept that is hard for people to grasp. Like the principle of it is nothing different than ever before. Like even again, if we go back to every big migration or every time in history where people were forced to go beyond the mountain, to go across the river, to go across the ocean, it was always resource driven. It was always driven out of conflict because one place outgrown itself, and now people will put the risk in because it's out of necessity. And back in the days, it was the kings and the queens financing those expeditions. They were the billionaires at that time, nothing different than today. It's hard for people to grasp what we are at now. But like you said, I think mining, when we get to the point when we can mine outside of the Earth, it's going to be the best thing that can happen to the Earth, because the problem with the Earth is not the resources, it's the extraction of resources, right?
Right, yeah.
You're working right now with Astroforge.
Yes, I am.
And they're looking to mine an asteroid passing by or going to it?
Going to it, they mine using a laser, and I think there's like a step-by-step approach, but they're actually building spacecraft, and that I thought was fascinating. There's no points of what we do in 20 years, but it's actually building a spacecraft and trying to land on an asteroid and then take the next step. So it's actually hands-on practical work in that sense.
And then you have Stoke Aerospace.
I have Stoke. Stoke attacks the complete reusability, the second stage reusability, which is the missing piece. SpaceX does that too with the Starship, but Starship has a technology and Stoke has another technology. So we see what works out in the end, or maybe both. Then I work a little bit with VAST. That's the space station. And I work with a German company called OHB that builds satellites.
Realistically, when you look at even VAST, it's an entrepreneur, made very good investments, and now putting their personal fortune into it. It's still a very huge endeavor to put a space station. Axiom started, it's not an overnight project that easy. Realistically, are we looking for another 15, 20 years before the commercial gets into the space station business, or?
I really hope not. I think the current plan is to go really quickly with the first version of what's called Haven 1, That would be the starting point of a commercial space station, which I hope NASA utilizes at that moment then too. And then from then on, there are concepts of having something like Haven 2. The big goal in the end, and that's kind of what fascinated me from the get-go, was trying to create artificial gravity on that space station. So you basically get a chance to maybe test out what are the human factors when you go to Moon longer or to Mars longer, right? We actually don't know that. Yeah, we know microgravity pretty well. We know Earth obviously pretty well, but we don't know anything in between. Like, does Mars have the same kind of damage that we see in microgravity? Or is that enough? How about Moon, right? And that's something that you could test on those space stations. Totally apart from the fact that you can also, you benefit from what we learned at the International Space Station over many, many years. You can try to do this in an effective way. You can rent out the space for science. You can rent out the space for somewhat of a tourism portion. So there's many multiple things you can do. And I have actually great hopes that VAST and maybe even others have a chance to do that.
I mean, you could easily understand the value of satellites, developing the satellites, having one kind of governmental space station where little science experiments are done. But to invest for a private or commercial space station, is the incentive kind of to be the first versus the Chinese, or is there like a very strong business model?
I don't think there's business model per se at this point in time. That's certainly a long-term goal. But two things that come to mind for me is number one is like, can we live in space? Basically boils down to, yeah. And then also, can we build like something like a spaceship that goes somewhere with the technology, what we learned at the space stations? And so one thing that is really interesting is, can you close the loop, right? Can you actually make a habitat that can sustain itself in terms of food, in terms of oxygen, and so on and so forth, humidity control, and so on. How big does it have to be until it basically can sustain itself? The rest of the minimum size. And then if you master those technologies, which we haven't done yet, we're pretty close on the International Space Station, but we're not at 100%. Once you do that, you can actually build ships that can actually go longer. They can go, 10 years or a year or whatever it is. And then you kind of open the door to more human space exploration than what we have right now. Right now we have so much food to carry along, so much oxygen. We create garbage along the way that we need to get rid of. And so the system is not quite sustainable now, but there's technologies that we are working on, and we is basically humanity to make that completely sustainable. And to be fair, then also this technology has an impact here on Earth, right? Because we can actually do the same thing here. We could technically take a spaceship and go underwater and live there. We could take the lessons and apply them to how we treat our garbage and how we treat our food. So there's many ways that technology can flow back into everyday life, basically.
The incentive here on the planet are almost counterintuitive. It's actually more expensive to be efficient because there used to be so much of it that it's actually cheaper just to throw it away and then to go and get more. But in space, the incentives are reversed. You can't afford to throw out that transform atom of carbon. You have to figure out how to reuse and recycle it, because you don't have like another Earth to stop by and resupply. You have to be self-sustainable into that closed loop.
And to be fair, I mean, you have the same incentive technically on Earth if you think just on a bigger scale. If you only think of the scale of your house or where you live, and then obviously if you throw something out that's gone for you, but it's not. So obviously it's the same incentive on the Earth to become sustainable and have the similar situation, because otherwise we run into trouble and we get more and more people on this planet.
It just takes longer to realize.
Yeah, exactly. The time constant to fill up the trash can is really long.
Yes.
But so that several people don't see that. But once you develop technologies for spaceship, then obviously you can make the link with how this is on Earth, and you see the connection.
I just came back from East Antarctica. Every time I find myself on the ship, now the experience of going to Antarctica or the Arctic is dramatically, from even just 10, 15 years ago. But you're crossing the Southern Ocean. You're connected to the satellite. You see the systems where they are. You get a ship that has stabilizers, that have a hull that's specifically done for this. You look out the window and you're totally disconnected from the elements, whatever wind that are blowing, waves. you continue dining and having an experience that is parallel to your environment but not affected. And I'm trying to imagine 100 years ago when they were crossing at the mercy of the elements and kind of just totally putting their lives at risk just for the sake of exploration. And now you're looking at space, and you can easily compare how, like, space right now is still a very rudimentary experience, very bare bone. Food is just very dry process. But 100 years from now, what do you think that the experience could be of space?
Yeah, I haven't really thought in terms of like food and all the comfort that we have on a cruise ship, basically. But yeah, I think it goes a little bit already on even on the commercial space stations. Things look a lot less technical than they do on the international. If you look at images from the International Space Station, it looks like a laboratory in basically all dimensions, right? Even the ceiling is a laboratory because there's no ceiling really, and everything is taped on and everything is like tied down with zip ties and Velcro. And so it's a very technical thing. And so you look at the space station designs there's several companies that develop that right now, and they look comparably fancy to that. Now, I think probably the International Space Station looked a lot fancier before it was built too. But yeah, you're probably right in that comfort and, better food and everything will sneak in, and then that will open the door for maybe more tourism on that side. It's going to be interesting because in my eyes, actually, tourism and commercial and communication are two of the main commercial applications in space. There's a lot of other applications, but they're not easily to commercialize. Things like GPS have like a large industry for receivers, but it's hard to use the GPS satellites to make direct money out of that. Yeah, it's a little bit more convoluted to create an economy of that. The communication was always an economy, whether it's like direct TV or a broadcast TV or now basically internet. By the way, this goes to Starlink. I have Starlink on my house, so definitely a commercial application. And then the same category I think I see with space tourism, whether it's what Michi and I did on New Shepard, or whether it's a visit to the ISS or a visit to potentially Haven 1 once it has been launched.
Tourism is almost a necessary evil, and it's a double-edged sword in where things like even nature, the people who actually enjoy nature the most are not necessarily the ones who want to pay for it. Everything needs to be paid for, and you need to have some kind of economic model that can be sustained because, Antarctica, great. Now you were talking about 100,000 visitors. Is it great? Is it bad? Is it great? Well, it depends how it's experienced. But if it's done properly, it becomes the best thing that people can experience.
At the end of the day, 100,000 people know Antarctica and probably value it more and probably understand the beauty and fragility of the place as long as you do it right. And, you basically bring everything back that you brought and don't leave anything there and all kinds of different things you should do right. But if you do that right, I think you basically educate a lot of people about the situation. And that's overall, I think, a good thing.
Isn't that the value of exploration, to give you perspective and to make you appreciate what you have?
Exploration, I think, is the ultimate travel at the end of the day, right? But just traveling alone, foreign countries and everything, opens your mind and makes you appreciate people that are different ways you can do, makes you wonder sometimes if you could do things better and if you could use different strategies to do certain things. And so I think overall, travel is one of the best things you can do with your time to learn about other people, other things.
There's always the expected, what we think is going to happen. Like even you as an engineer, there's so much. You could spend all your time on simulation, learning, but there's always the physicality and the reality of systems because it's dynamic, because it doesn't want perfection, because there's constantly the unseen, that there's always the experience, the unexpected experience that gives you a different perspective. For your flight up, you shared that the color black, the silence. What else did you not expect in that experience?
The dynamic of the whole flight surprised me a little bit. And I knew everything about that, right? In a way. I looked at data for like many, many years. And I know how it is. I know what 5Gs are. But like one thing, when you have MECO, so main engine cutoff, it disorients you. It's like suddenly it feels like the capsule separates and your balance system thinks you're upside down. And you look out of the window and you go, okay, everything is fine. You're in the right spot. But it just feels like for like a brief moment, like you're tumbling and you're upside down. It's just like your head or your inner ear actually that messes with you there. So that was something that I didn't expect, basically. Coming back, the Shepherd goes up 105 kilometers, comes down straight. So it's like it's a reentry, but it's more like a belly flop type reentry. It's like vertical, right? And so the G loads are pretty high, even just coming out of 100 kilometers. And so I didn't expect that to be. I mean, I've seen 5Gs in airplanes, and you feel it, and sometimes you have to fight that your eyes don't close, but it's like a brief moment. It's something that doesn't really build up over time in airplanes. And so here you build it up over, a certain amount of time, and you feel the 5G. I felt like somebody sitting on me, and then just thought, okay, this is, this is actually a lot. Then it actually ends. It's not long. So it's just a brief period. It's not uncomfortable in the way you have anything after this, but for a brief moment you feel the force, and I didn't expect it to be that much of a force, for lack of a better term here. It also goes really, really fast. I mean, you're trying to inhale everything, you're trying to absorb everything that you see, and in reality it's also a pretty short moment. You got to pay attention as much as you can.
Did you struggle, and because the adrenaline is so high, once you get to zero gravity, your first instinct is to focus on that zero gravity. Did you spend the time to look out the window?
I did. I felt zero gravity or microgravity before in a parabolic flight. It's been a while, but I've done that. So I had a little bit of experience. I also didn't fly alone. This was with Michi Benthaus, and she was actually the reason why I did that. And she's in a wheelchair, so she can't walk. And I had certain, I don't want to say responsibilities, because she's really self-sustained and everything. Yeah? But I did check that she gets back in the seat, and if everything is okay with her. Yeah. And so I kind of had to look after that too, right?
Who initiated the idea of the flight? Was that her or was that you?
A little bit of both, I would say. She kind of put like a theoretical question in my head. She asked me, could somebody like me be an astronaut? And then I thought about that, and I thought, well, technically, I don't think you need your legs. That's not totally true. You do still use them sometimes to lock yourself in position or something like that. But fundamentally, you can move around with your fingers. You don't need very little force. And so I talked to some people at Blue about this, and they said they would actually love to just test that and give us an opportunity to try that. And so I thought, well, why don't we do that? So it kind of I would say, inspired by her. And then I had my heart on this one too.
She works for the aerospace. I mean, she's German background, just like you.
She works for ESA, for the European Space Agency. But the flight has nothing to do with that. I want to point that out. I mean, she's a scientist for the agency, and this is totally unrelated to her role there. She asked me, I want to say a couple of years ago, she asked me if I can help her funding for a parabolic flight that she wanted to do. So kind of the same thing. She was sitting in a wheelchair, wanted to do a parabolic flight, if I could help with funding. And then I actually worked for OHB on the board, and I just called them, and they said, yeah, they can do this. And so she got some funding, basically, yeah. And that's where I know her from. So I knew that she was interested in pushing the boundaries for wheelchair users, so to speak. And she definitely pushed it this time.
You're an engineer, you look at systems, can it be done, and then you work at trying to figure them out. A lot of people look at where the world is and is not confident about the future. Do you look ahead and are confident that things are going to get better, or are we going to figure things out?
I mean, we are our own obstacle here, right? It's the human side that, in my opinion, has trouble dealing with our own technology. And so we have to learn this. And I am afraid that we go through another cycle of really learning on how much damage we can do. So I have the same concerns and the same doubt, basically. But I also know that we, as humanity, must survive and must continue. And hopefully we can avoid a really expensive learning cycle. I feel like part of it is also, it's so much easier to work with technology than with humans. And maybe that's why some people choose that, myself included, right? It's so much easier to program a computer than to make people be content and peaceful and all the things that you want in life. So that might be one of the reasons we really dig into technology and don't try to dig into humanity.
The unfortunate reality is nature is built in the way that it doesn't want perfection. It wants tension. It wants evolution. And how do you create evolution? But just that making sure that there's constant disruptions.
This is actually something that I've learned actually in Galapagos. You've probably seen the same thing. In Galapagos, you understand that evolution is not that somehow magically the best survive. No, it's the other ones to die. And evolution is actually one of the most brutal principles in that sense. Yeah. But the way it is always presented is like, oh, it's like if you happen to be on the most adaptable branch of your species, then life continues for you. And you miss a little bit like life does not for all the other branches. And that's kind of like a difficult lesson.
When people say that everything is harmonious in nature, I'm like, no. I don't know.
Nope.
If you step from very, 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 very far away, you're going to see an ecosystem in where, yes, everything is connected, but it's not connected because it wants to. It's connected because everybody's part of that system. So everything that you do doesn't happen in a vacuum. But the closer you get, every single organism is competing for the resources, and every single organism left to their own devices will destroy their environment if they don't adapt or don't figure out how to get to beyond.
Well, it's a balance. It tries to balance, right? And sometimes the balance has wild swings over and under. And that includes, obviously, that some species destroy their environment. And then next year, there will be no species anymore, and the environment will come back. So it's kind of like a balance. And we are conscious enough to not totally repeat destroying environments, at least partly, but we are not quite there yet.
And that's a huge feat by itself, because never in the history of the planet or nature has a species has had to kind of reflect on what it does. The rats, the whales, or even the monkeys, the chimpanzees, there are no other species that kind of like has to look at how much they poop or how much they eat and go and say, maybe that's a little bit too much. We have to be mindful of everything we're doing. Every single organism kind of do what it does, and then the world around it has to adapt. We're the first one ever that has to compete within an intellect that is not always in sync with the biology. And we're constantly battling these two realities, and where, great, I know that my mind says, I'm not going to go and have a glass of wine tonight, but it's a very complicated world and reality. And I think that we take it for granted, and we don't understand very much the complexity. How hard is it?
Well, sometimes you have species that keep each other a little bit under control. And so if one species gets too strong, then it destroys itself. And typically, so there's a little bit of harmony if you look at it without any disturbance, basically. But the moment you have disturbance in the system, it's not the harmony basically goes downhill.
It's a harmony from which perspective, though? The prey and the predator. If you look at the deer, if you take out the predators, the deer are just going to eat everything in the forest is going to be damaged. But then, you reintroduce predators. From the perspective of the deer, it's not really harmonious. They don't see the wolf or the coyotes as like, great, they're bringing balance into the ecosystem. They're just developing their strategy, their survival strategy in relationship to a predator. And that's why I'm saying, like, when you step from very far away, you see all these actors playing together, but the closer you get, everybody is trying to figure out how to survive.
If you look closely, then you see that the actors try to eat each other to survive.
Listen, the whales are not migrating between the Arctic and Antarctica just because they like to travel. There's not a travel club within the whales. They're expending that much energy and exposing themselves to the elements for two reasons only: to eat and to give birth. And that's the reality of the natural world that lives at the mercy of the elements that are around them. The humans are the first one who's been able to create stability and predictability on those elements, on that randomness. And we've been building, and that has been our success, in where now we can do things that nature is great, but at the same time, we go beyond, and we expand not only what we can do, but how long we can live, and all these different opportunities. So,
well, take the salmon or the trouts, basically, that go back to their native place. They could ask themselves, why the hell are we doing this? Why don't we just go to the other place, right? And they probably do, but then they find out the other places are not good and they all die. And so it is basically the place where they come from, just simply by the fact that it worked last time. And so it worked this time again. So there is sometimes just repeating what your parents did gets you further. We are beyond that. I think we are more like at a place where we can say, why is that actually? How do we figure that out? How can we make this better?
There was a human cost of knowledge back in the days. If you needed to know what was the weather in Antarctica in the middle of the winter, you had to physically go and spend the winter in Antarctica, almost die in the process, so that you could collect every single day temperature and all this. Today, we have robots on Mars that are collecting data, that are collecting all this information, so that by the time we do show up to Mars, we'll never be blinded in the same way that people were blinded when they were going anywhere before. So
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they didn't have that information. They just assumed it's really cold.
If you wanted to know if Greenland was an island or not, you had to go around Greenland. You had to make an expedition, and then you had to brave the elements. Now we just have a satellite that looks above and go, no, it's not a, I mean, it is an island or, so.
Yeah, it's a big island.
Yeah, it's a big island. Hans, what would be 3 words of wisdom?
It's a little bit of like a model that I have, but it's in German. And so I can translate it into English. It's something like do it now kind of thing. And that actually is 3 words. What I mean by that is like whatever you want to do, whatever the plan is, don't push it aside, don't park it, don't say you're going to do this next year, but do it now. And in many cases, that's the right choice.
Nice. It is. I think that the world, if there is something in where we can all be grateful, is the spectrum of experiences that is available now for a lot of people. And even if it's, it's not everyone, I think that more and more the world is becoming, if you take aside some, the politics and some of the issues that are happening, we're nowhere even close to some of the awful times that we know of the past, right? Someone now can be in a wheelchair and think of a future that is different, whether it's sports, whether it's mechanics, whether it's anything. There are opportunities today that people would have dreamed in the past. So what's next for you?
I don't really know. Okay, I haven't made a lot of plans. I was working on this flight, and rocket or just engineers are just super superstitious. And so I didn't make any plans after that. And now I'm basically, okay, I got to figure out what to do next. Who knows? I'm still working with my 4 companies, and I think I'm trying to be as useful as I can. I want to go back and have a couple projects on programming, and I'm actually in that already. But there's nothing, it's kind of difficult also after that to have the next big project, because it was a big project, and a big project takes a lot of time. So I haven't quite figured out the next big project, but who knows? Maybe I get some ideas.
Hans, you got to do it now.
I'm pretty sure that will happen. That will happen. I'm totally sure.
Well, if SpaceX goes IPO, that's going to give you even more wings to figure out.
If Elon says that will happen.
Yes. Hans, always a pleasure. I look forward for our next lunch, travel. I know if the timing was different, the Galapagos was going to be, we would have traveled that together, but who knows, maybe the Arctic or the total solar eclipse. We're doing a bunch of programs of future space, so hopefully we'll have.
Definitely. Yeah, that sounds super interesting.
Thank you so much, Hans.
All right. Thank you.